Hi everyone, I thought I'd make this video to show you the way I work with ASM80, my assembler and debugger of choice. It's an online assembler for Z80 and a number of other 8-bit microprocessors. It has built-in debugger and it all works within a browser window, which is very cool. I'll just bring it up here just to show it to you. ASM80 has a file window to the left, which you can create new files in. You need to specify the microprocessor format that you're going to be using, and you need to give it a name. So let's go with that. With no extension, create a file, and away you go. It does syntax highlighting and all the usual sorts of things that you might expect in a pretty decent file editor. It has its quirks, but it is pretty good. And I usually write directly in the assembler window here. So if we could do something like a simple loop, etc., that kind of thing. You can hit compile. It then generates these files. You get a hex file and a listing file. You can see that it's done a pretty straightforward job with the assembler and so on. Best still, you can run it under emulation, which I won't do in this case because you won't see anything. But basically, I also need to set it up. So that's ASM80. But the key stuff here is that this filing system should not be trusted for long-term storage. There are a number of tools provided by ASM80 for importing from GitHub and to import from a gist as well, which is a special kind of file that exists on GitHub, useful for explaining things. And you can also download your work as a zip file. And I make heavy use of importing from GitHub, a repo, and exporting as a zip file. I don't really use the workspaces that much because I haven't, there are issues with regard to the Firebase database, and people have talked about losing work. And I'm just going to continue with this this tutorial just to help people not lose work. So let's just delete these files. And the key point about not losing work is to use a version control system. So of course I use GitHub as my main system. GitHub uses Git as which is a series of command line tools for manipulating these things. My editor, VS Code, has Git integration built in, so I often don't have to use those command line tools. I often just work directly with the Git integration in VS Code, which is a great little editor, and I highly recommend people check it out. It's become my editor of choice, not just for my Z80 projects, but also for my day job, because it's the web developer's editor of choice. So the first thing we want to do is you want to set up a repo on GitHub. You can see I've got a number of them sitting up here. Many of them are Z80 based. So I'm going to just bring down my latest and into my VS Code editor. And the reason why I do that is that I want to have a local copy of my repository. I want to use the ASM80 to be able to work in it. And then I want to basically just use VS Code to ensure that it all gets backed up. It would have been nice if ASM80 had slightly better GitHub integration, and then I wouldn't even need this local step. I could just work completely in the cloud. That would be fine. But you know, this is the reason for this video, is just because it's not really the way things work. So let's talk about the code that we want to bring in. So this is this repo here, Z4th, is the one I'm going to be bringing in. Now, in ASM80, all we need to do is import based on this URL. This URL, GitHub, username, and then the name of the repo is what you need to bring it into ASM80. So we just do this. And now we have lots and lots of files. As I say, it's a pretty decent editor, and it does color highlighting, and you know, I use it pretty extensively in this form. So once you've made some work in here, you want to basically get this stuff back to your repo on GitHub. There's no way to push directly to GitHub from ASM80, and that's the only downside. You can push a gist, but that's not a repo, and we can talk about gists another time. The way that I work is I also, in addition to working in ASM80, is I use my VS Code and make a local copy of Z4th in this case. So what I do is I go to my VS Code editor, and you know, you can often just see this kind of you can just if you've got no workspace open and you've got things set up, you can just go clone repository. So, and you can just go clone from GitHub. It then lists all of your repos. You can just go, okay, I just want Z4th. And they say, okay, where do you want to put it? So put it into your projects folder, and it literally clones it, and it asks whether you would like to add it to your current workspace or open in a new window. I'm going to say add to my workspace. Okay, there's Z4th. And here are all the files again. So you can see VS Code is also color highlighting the Z80. That's because I set it up that way. There's some various Z80 plugins that you can get for VS Code. But like I say, I'm not actually editing it using VS Code. I'm just using VS Code as my way of dealing with Git in a fairly painless way. So that's my local version of Z4th. This is my remote version, and this is the version that I've got on ASM80. So let's imagine that we wanted to make some changes. Say we wanted to add a constant. We'll just keep it simple. So we'll call a constant, you know, x, y, z. And it's got a value of hexadecimal 100. That's the only change that I've made, but it could have been a lot more substantial than that. I could, for example, have made any kind of code changes that I wanted, but let's just go with that. Okay, so the main thing is this has been saved. Well, you know, you do things like Command S to save, or Control S to save it. You make any change to it, you get a little red marker, which it reminds you to save before you change files. So if I try to change files, it'll warn me. This is kind of annoying. It would be better if it just auto-saved, but that's just the way it is. The point is that this is now only got 1 or 2 lines different from where I started. But I've decided I want to commit this to my repo. So first thing I do is I download the workspace as a zip file. And what that does is it opens up in Finder on my Mac or in File Manager on your system. And there are the files in another directory. I want to basically copy those across to my Z80 directory. So the easiest, there's a few different ways of going for this, but I'm just going to Command C to copy, go to my projects directory, look for Z80, and then hit paste. I get this warning, which says that some of these files already exist, and I want to just replace them all, and I want to do it to all of them. So I hit apply to all, replace. And you go, okay, how do I know that anything has actually changed? Well, let's have a look in VS Code. Now, you can see here that VS Code has got it's got a files view, but it's also got a repo view. And so the repo view here says, oh, something has changed. See the one? If we go in there, we can see, oh, one thing has changed. If we click on it, we see, there's been a line XYZ that's been added. So you go, okay, well then this is a change that I want to commit. I might want to make some more changes, but let's just say, oh, let's make an extra change. Let's add some extra stuff here on this side, X, Y, ABC. Code complete is great on the VS Code, except when you don't want it. So A, B, C, honestly, there should be a colon there. Anyway, but we can live without a colon. Yep, let's just go. Yeah, they've got all sorts of code completion. I'm not so sure that you really need that for Z80, but anyway, let's just go with that. I use the dollar to represent hexadecimal in preference to putting a 0 at the front and an H at the end. I just think that old Intel style is unnecessary, and I don't want to use the C syntax, but ASM80 handles all of these formats. It's extremely forgiving, and I consider that a good thing. I know some people want their assembler to be very unforgiving. This is a philosophical thing. I don't think I've ever had errors introduced to my code through this sort of issue, but there are different opinions about this. So now I've made 2 lines. So you can see that basically we're looking at essentially at a diff. If I'd done something like removed one of the lines, you'll see red line appearing in the diff saying that, oh, that's gone. And then the green stuff indicates what's new. I obviously don't want to delete that line, so I'm bringing it back. But this is the state of what we're trying to commit now back to Git. So in here, all we have to do in most cases is simply, now, if I didn't like any of those changes, I could revert. That's one thing we could do, is that we could actually discard everything and just go back. And so if for example, you found that there was something nasty happening in your code and you can't work it out, you can always just throw away the little bits that you don't need, and away you go. But instead, I'm going to commit it, and I'm going to say added to constants. This is a comment that gets added to the commit, so that when you go to GitHub, you can see what the nature of the change was. You can hit tick, and now we have one difference that can be synchronized with the remote Z80 repo. So I can click any of this basically, but if I just click this, it synchronizes the 2 repos. It's already done it. If we now go to GitHub and we look in the constants file, voila, there's your extra files. So there you can see that I now have absolutely not lost my changes, but ASM80 is a little bit out of date. It doesn't have the most up-to-date stuff. So what we need to do to bring ASM80 up to the same level is we need to just import it again. So what I did was I just imported the URL of the repo, and I go import repo from GitHub. Now you won't see any change because we're looking at the file, but if we go away from the file and we come back, it's updated. So there you go. We've got changes being synchronized back and forth. I'll agree it's a little bit of a process, but I do like the extra step of making changes and then being able to review them before I commit them. So the VS Code view kind of gives me a nice thing for me to work out whether I'm committing the right stuff. So let's just go through that process one more time. I'm going to remove these. We're just going to go back to where we were. I could make other changes. You know, let's say we just add some carriage returns here and there, just trivial stuff because I'm really not wanting to make big changes to this repo right now. Download the zip file. All right, open up the zip file, select all, copy, as in Command C or Control C, find your repo, Command V or Control V, apply, replace, and then go back to VS Code, and it's already showing me the diff. It's showing me that 2 files have changed. Remember that we're in the Git repository view at the moment, source control view. So 2 things have happened. The constants have changed and the header has changed. We've inserted a couple of blank lines. Now, here's an example where I do want this change because I literally want this change, but I don't need this stuff I don't need. So I'm just going to throw it away because it was just trivial. So I'm going to discard the changes. You can actually discard it on a line-by-line basis if you really want to, but I'm just going to do it to the whole file in this case. Bang, it's gone, and therefore the change doesn't exist anymore. The only thing that's going to change is this constants files. And I'm just going to put in a comment saying removed constants. And then, so synchronized that uploaded the changes to the Git repo. We now go back to Git, and we can see that if we go inside constants, those additional lines have gone. They're no longer there. And if we then go back to get that URL again, and we import the repo from GitHub. You won't see anything because you need to go away from the file and come back. But there you go. You can see it's been updated. Now, one thing I need to mention about this this GitHub integration is that it's not a very sophisticated integration, and it has a cache, which means to say that if you keep trying to synchronize this way, you will come across the fact that GitHub will only allow you to hit their server every 5 minutes. So if you've made changes very, very rapidly, you may notice that you don't see those changes come back immediately because of the cache, and that cache is 5 minutes long, and you just have to go off and make a cup of tea and come back and it'll work. But that's just one of those quirks. I know why it was done this way. It would be nice if ASM80 had a deeper GitHub integration that used Git's proper APIs rather than this lightweight API. But I know that this is being done in the browser. And the amazing thing about ASM80 is it doesn't have a back end other than it has some integrations to back ends, but it can operate completely in your browser without being without requiring any sophisticated servers on the back end. So, you know, contrast that with Gmail or any other application which has got quite a heavy back end component. This is all happening in your browser. I think it's an amazing achievement by Martin, and I really still think it's one of the best ways of doing work this way. So that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. Like I say, there's absolutely no requirement to use any specific assembler. Use the assembler that you like, but that also cuts both ways. I like this one. It means that I've got good at some of the facilities that it offers. There will be workarounds and alternatives in your assembler, and I would appreciate that if you manage to use any of these examples that I come up with later on, that you convert them to your assembler of choice and then share how you did it, because that would be useful. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for now. Thanks.